Traders, how are you? Marcello here, founder of the Day Trading Academy. Today we're going to be doing the recap of what happened in the markets last week. Overall this week, the major thing that affected the market was the news about the trade war or the currency war. For a long time now, and I'm going to explain this in a little bit more detail, the more quote-unquote industrialized or modern countries are not growing as much as they would like. So they're literally manipulating their currencies and also trying to help, quote unquote, their economies by injecting money into the markets. On Monday, we had a huge sell-off due to the fact that China devalued its currency with the US dollar to under 7-to-1 ratio, which is the first time it's happened since 11 years. So because of this, Trump has been very, very public about how they are manipulating their currency and how it's not fair to the US. That's what Trump says. And remember, I never get political on this show, right? I always want to make sure that I remind you guys of that. Doesn't matter if you're left, right, center, black, white, green, Asian, purple. I'm always just going to give you the facts. So due to the fact that China actually devalued their currency, it feared a lot of escalation because of obviously we still have a trade war going on between the United States and China. So the markets had a huge sell-off, the worst day for the Dow in 2019, the sixth worst point drop in history, and a loss of $1 trillion in market evaluation. The rest of the week, for the most part, China did take steps on Tuesday and Wednesday to try to ease the currency war with the United States. So we had the huge sell-off on Monday, and then after that we had a situation where it started to recover, and then we just ended very marginally negative for the week. The Dow negative 0.75%, the S&P negative 0.45%, and the NASDAQ negative 0.57%. In overseas market news, the situation in Hong Kong is still continuing to affect kind of the perception of what can happen overall. Remember that Hong Kong is one of the major financial hubs in the world. If you guys don't know the situation with Hong Kong, essentially it's a Chinese island, Chinese land, but they leased it out, they rented it out to the English. So the English essentially were running the island, and the way now, the culture of Hong Kong, even though they're Chinese, they speak Cantonese, which is let's say another kind of Mandarin, another kind of, not Mandarin, but another kind of Chinese. For those of you guys that, we don't want to get technical, but so the culture there, really the way they do things, the system of law, everything that they do is really more British than it is Chinese, even though the people there are Chinese. Well, a few years ago, roughly 10, 15 years ago, I don't know the exact date, but the English handed it over to China. And there's been a lot of concerns because China now starting to put its stamp. They're trying to kind of tighten down on Hong Kong like they have on mainland China. And now there have been 10 weeks of protests and nobody seems to be backing down. The protesters aren't backing down. China isn't backing down. And so this can get very, very out of hand very quickly, and it could be very detrimental not only to the world economy but to the financial system, because Hong Kong is one of the major financial hubs in the world. South Korean equities also have dropped 6.1% year to date. They're beating out Malaysia now as one of the world's worst major equity markets for the year. European markets were mostly lower this week, with Italy being the biggest loser at 3.56%. Latin America and Canadian markets overall mixed, with the Merval in Argentina being positive for the week, 7.24%. Africa and the Middle Eastern markets mostly mixed as well, with the biggest winner being Egypt at 4.84%. And in Asia and Australian markets mostly lower. One of the biggest losers is Hong Kong at 3.67%, with my dearest Filipino traders that we got out there now. The Filipino market went down 3.50%. Bitcoin and other news, Bitcoin gained for the week 13.11%. It reached just under 12,000. Super excited to be able to announce very soon that we're going to provide the funding services for Forex and crypto as well. We're already building out the site and making the connection, so it should be done, I would say, in about a month. In financial and banking news, and if you kind of going back there, if you guys don't know what the funding means, essentially if you want to learn how to day trade, we give you the opportunity to apply to use our money for a process starting for $120. So if you trade Forex or if you trade cryptos, for example, which I would not recommend, you can come and make some money, and then you can trade with a lot more capital, make a lot more money, and just give us a little bit for the, for the candies, a little bit extra for the candies. In financial and banking news, there's a grim state of trade relations between the world's largest economies, which is leaving the central banks to support the growth. This is why everybody's kind of a race to the bottom to negative interest rates, with the financial system being kind of supported by a lot of these central banks. In Japan, for example, the Japanese central bank, which, remember, central banks are not government entities, they are private banks owned by somebody. Remember that. The Japanese central bank literally owns more than 50% of the stocks in Japan. And now the US, Europe, the UK are becoming a lot more dovish on monetary policy. Asian central banks are furthering lowering interest rates. Reserve Bank of India went down 35 basis points to 5.4%, the lowest in 9 years. The New Zealand Central Bank aggressively cut 50 basis points to a record of low of 1%. And the Bank of Thailand did a cut of 25 basis points to 1.5%. And now the equivalent of $12 trillion of government-issued debt is now issuing at a negative interest rate, meaning earning less than zero. How does this work? You borrow somebody money and you have to pay them to borrow the money, essentially, right? It's just, we're in like Frankenstein world. The 10-year German bond hit negative 60 yield. The French 10-year yield went to negative 0.35. The Netherlands went down a negative 0.50. Switzerland negative 1. And the Japanese 10-year yield went to negative 20. Literally, the entire developed world is at almost a negative, almost everybody, right? Not everybody, is at a negative rate. So in Denmark as well, it's really, really interesting. In Denmark, they're actually issuing mortgages at a negative rate as well. For example, if you guys really want to consider good investments, and I'm looking for the information here that I wrote in my notes, if you're looking for really good investments, in Denmark, they're actually giving the mortgages at 0.5% because the interest rates are at a negative. So if you guys are looking for investments and you have capital, it would be a great idea to actually look this up, because you can literally borrow the money at almost zero. You get a 10-year mortgage, you rent out, an office property to a tenant that's going to pay you, and more likely than not, businesses pay, right? And you're going to have a beautiful property on your hands in 10 years. I mean, win-win. Other than that, we have a situation where crude went down this week as well. It's now down 7% for the month. U.S. crude went down 1.70% to 54.27. International Brent went down 5% to 58.25. Battery producers and electric car makers are starting to worry over the long-term supplies of nickel due to a lack in the investment of new mines. They're saying that within 5 years, we're actually going to have a deficit of the metal nickel, which goes into a lot of these cars. Gold futures are up to 1,500 an ounce, high since 2013, with a 17% gain in 2019. Gold so far has outperformed U.S. stocks in 2019, and also silver's up 3% to about $17 an ounce. Wonder who was telling you guys about the run in gold and silver for a while, huh? Now, this isn't going to be the big run, and remember, this is only for educational purposes. I'm not going to recommend you guys buy something because it's illegal. I'm not a trading advisor. I can't tell you guys what to buy, what to sell, but definitely do your own research, and there might be some opportunities out for you. Other than that, in political news, voters in Scotland are now reporting that they're backing independence, and there's going to likely be another referendum within 2 years for Scottish residents or Scottish people to leave the UK. It looks like more likely now with the Brexit that the UK is going to be torn apart. Brazil's lower house of Congress has approved a pension overhaul bill, which is something that they desperately need because the state is just the cost of Brazil doing business and eating and lifestyle, everything is absolutely just way too high. It's something that Bolsonaro promised, and it's a good thing that it's actually going through Congress now. In economic news, the growth in the U.S. services sector decelerated in July to its weakest level since August 2016. Obviously, this gives concern over the overall American economy. U.S. job openings fell in a bit in June from 7.38 million to 7.35. It still topped 7 million for a record 15th month in a row. And UK, which is still the fifth largest economy in the world, shrank for the first time since 2012 in quarter two by 0.2%. And now the pound, the UK currency is down 30 to a 31-month low versus the United States dollar. Corporate news, Berkshire Hathaway, which is owned by Warren Buffett, recorded operating earnings of $6.14 billion in quarter two. It slipped a little bit from $6.89 billion in quarter two last year. They had a plunge of 63% in the insurance underwriting and also reported a record $122 billion in cash. Disney went down 5% since its quarter two revenue increased by 33%, even though their profits fell by 51%. And they've bolstered their bottom line by direct-to-consumer sales, for example, like Hulu and Blockbuster, and they're getting ready to launch their own streaming service called Disney Plus in November. Apple is now under investigation from the Russian authorities. They're saying that they are abusing their dominant position. It was reported by the company called Kaspersky, which is a very popular antivirus software. I actually recommend it. It's very good. Ride-sharing company Lyft expects revenue to hit for the full year $3.5 billion due to strong rider growth, but they're still losing tons of money. And speaking of losing tons of money, Uber only lost $5.2 billion in quarter two. After going public, they had to do $3.9 billion in stock-based compensation to a lot of their drivers. Even without this cost, they still lost $1.3 billion. It's a 50% increase from the previous year, but revenue was $3.1 billion, which is an increase of 14%. Trade news, car sales by Japanese automakers in South Korea slumped 32%. If you guys remember last week, I talked about the little trade war that's happening now between Japanese and the South Koreans. Trump is also planning on freezing the assets of the Venezuelan state in the U.S. to try to force Maduro out. I'm still going to stick by my prediction that Maduro is most likely going to be out by the end of the year. It's going to ban any U.S. firms dealing with the Venezuelan government or possibility of helping any foreign firms or individuals helping the Venezuelan government. Chinese firms have stopped buying U.S. agricultural goods by government orders. They're actually getting their soybeans now from South America. And U.S. Treasury is saying that the imposition of tariffs on the U.S. by China, or on the China by the U.S., has already seen a U.S. government collect $63 billion in the last 12 months. In technology, there's a French inventor named Frankie Zapata. Zapata definitely doesn't sound like a French last name, unless it's like Zapata, whatever it is in French. But he actually was hovered through a hoverboard through the English Channel. So he flew from France all the way to the amazing island of the English after stopping over in the Strait of Dover for a little refueling on a boat. It took him about 20 minutes but going over 100 miles an hour. It's pretty impressive. China now has its own operating system called Harmony OS, or in Chinese, Hongmeng, if you guys are interested in speaking Chinese. They obviously, the whole situation with being barred, they're trying to come up with a new system to be able to go and compete against Android, the Android operating platform, which is the biggest in the world by a lot. It's over 90%. And they want to also replace Microsoft Windows for computers and also tablets. In investment news, U.S. investigators are urging the world to impose targeted financial sanctions against anybody doing business with the military in Myanmar. They're saying that the foreign firms that are doing business with them can be complicit in international crimes. Jeff Bezos, richest man in the world, founder and CEO of Amazon, sold $2.8 billion worth of shares in the past week. He still hasn't given a reason as to why, but the stock did go down 3.2%, and he is currently selling about $1 billion a year of Amazon stock to be able to invest in his space exploration company called Blue Origin. Tencent, which is the Facebook of China, has 900 million active users, invested a 10% stake with Vivendi in Universal Music. It was valued at $3.36 billion, one of the largest music labels in the world. And now they're going to start breaking into that market as well. Broadcom and cybersecurity firm Symantec has reached a deal. Broadcom is going to buy Symantec's enterprise security business for $10.7 billion to help it diversify a little bit about main memory chip business. But it does need regulatory approval. And international events, we talked about the situation in Hong Kong, which looks like it's starting to escalate. In India, there's also a bit of a situation as well in Kashmir. So this is India, this is Pakistan, they're on the border, and there's an area in the Himalayas right up here, which is called Kashmir, that has been kind of like Catalonia in Spain, right? Where they're kind of part of the country, but they get some special treatment. Well, this week, the Indian government decided no more of the special treatment. They went in there, took control of it, cut off the internet, and now there's a little bit of a escalation between the two countries again. The Kashmir region has been the cause of the last 2 of 3 wars between Pakistan and India in the last 70 years. Pakistan, mostly Muslim, India, mostly Hindu, but the Kashmir region is one of the significant Muslim areas of India. An envoy of Trump is suggesting that since Chancellor Angela Merkel is unwilling to boost defense spending, that they're going to have to leave no choice for the U.S. to move its military bases from Germany to Poland. And an unusual fact this week, Saudi Arabia is now allowing adult women to travel without permission and granting them more control over family matters. There are a lot of new rights for women, but may be thwarted by the historical customs of patriarchy in the kingdom. Mexican officials, there was a 1,567 gold coin theft worth $2.5 million during the day. They are suspecting some funny business and now are starting to question the employees to see why the vault was completely open. In Barney's department store near century-old Icon in New York City, retail filed for bankruptcy. They got a $75 million, not billion dollar bailout. Support the sale process that's going to allow the closing of 15 of its 22 locations. I mentioned the Denmark situation for possible investments there if you guys are interested in that. And large parts of the UK, including Scotland and Wales, were hit by a temporary power outage, affecting trains, knocking out traffic lights, and disrupting an airport during rush hour on Friday evening, which is probably a little bit of funny business. We'll see what the news comes out with that. And other than that, Putin was appointed acting prime minister on August 9th, 1999 by then President Boris Yeltsin. He has been in office as president or prime minister ever since, spanning 2 decades. That's the news for this week, guys. Let me know if you guys have any questions, and we'll see you next week.